My name is Athira. I am a Ph.D. scholar in NIPGR. I will be taking a lesson titled Evolution of 12th Biology as a part of Donate Your Time for Nation Building through Delhi Knowledge Track. So what do you mean by evolution? Evolution could be called or defined as a history of mankind or history of the entire formation of life forms or formation of anything in this universe. When it is history, why should we study it in science? This might be a very primary question that arises in everybody's head. अब हम evolution को science में क्यों पढ़ेंगे? Because it is supported by a lot of scientific evidences, a lot of scientific proofs. So in order to know that, we have to go back to a bit where when we are looking at a sky in the night, what do you see? We see stars, moons, etc. But did you know that the stars are actually far away from us? Really far away, like light years. Light years away, and 1 light year is nothing but how much light, the distance light travels in a year. Now we know that light travels 3 lakh kilometers per second, so that is a huge time. So if you are telling that the stars are millions and millions of light years away, actually the stars that you are looking at right now is nothing but you are looking into your past. So we can say that in this time scale a lot of things has happened on the earth. Maybe at a point there was no earth at all. So they say the universal Big Bang was nothing but a huge explosion on some unimaginable physical terms happened around 20 billion years ago. So the Big Bang or the first explosion happened around 20 billion years ago. और अब इसके आगे क्या हुआ, जो हमारा गैलेक्सी है मिल्की वे, सो दैट मिल्की वे वॉज फॉर्म्ड around 4.5 billion years ago. Now Earth is a part of this Milky Way, so you can assume that Earth was also formed around this time. And if we come to the life forms on Earth, we exactly don't know when they were formed, but we can still say certain life-giving molecules or chemicals were formed around life-giving molecules, let's say. $2,000 billion years ago, and maybe the cellular life forms was formed 500 billion years ago. So how do we come to know that this was actually what happened, and how do we know how life actually originated on Earth? So let's go to the origin of life. When we go to origin of life, there are few interesting theories. Like some scientists who believed that extracellular life exists, believed in a theory called panspermia. From its name, it's very clear. Pan means from outside, spermia means a spore or a life-generating object or a body that can give rise to a rice. So some people actually believed or still believes that the life came from the outer space, extraterrestrial. However, we have not actually found any evidence to compare our lives with an extraterrestrial life so that we could validate this particular theory. And there was another interesting theory called spontaneous generation. Actually, spontaneous generation is something that we would have seen in our everyday life. If you keep a piece of bread for a few days, or if you keep an orange out for a long time, what happens to it? We see on a loaf of bread in few days maybe some mold comes, or on an orange after few days due to rotting some mold comes, say green mold or blue mold. So this was the whole idea of spontaneous generation. They actually believed that life can arise spontaneously from any material. But then the very brilliant experiments done by Louis Pasteur actually disproved this. Louis Pasteur, what he did was he sterilized his flask and then kept materials inside that flask, or he kept materials and then he sealed it by sterilization, and he found out that the life was not actually spontaneously generating, but instead if it was kept in open, it was actually generating spontaneously. Hence the theory of spontaneous generation was disproved. Later came Urey and Miller. Urey and Miller came with a very interesting set of experiments where they showed that actually the life originated as a process of chemical evolution. So let's see what they did. These two brilliant scientists were enough to speculate the older earthly conditions. Let's say we know that we've heard that earlier Earth was not actually Earth, it was a giant ball of gases, or should I represent it as like this, because it was not properly land like, it was a giant ball of mass and gases. Later, due to gravity, it condensed to become a solid mass which didn't have a proper atmosphere like we have today, or we shouldn't call it whether it was proper or improper today, but it just favors us. So the atmosphere was not like today, but the atmosphere was more extreme, like there was more temperature, high temperatures, and then there were gases like ammonia, methane, and say what else, hydrogen or helium, right? So these were the few early masses that was there. Somehow this hydrogen under high temperature and due to the lightning and other extreme conditions that was there on Earth back then was able to combine with ammonia to form water like substances, let's say somewhere around in between H2O rows, and this H2O was broken up by sun's UV radiation into hydrogen and oxygen. This hydrogen escaped the atmosphere because of its light weight, and oxygen stayed. Now this oxygen combined with methane to form carbon dioxide and water again. So these were few of the early experiments they did. So from all these they came to know that in the electric, so what they did was they took a round bottom flask and they did experimental design where they actually had a lot of these extreme conditions within the flask, and they stuck various electric arcs such that they wanted to create a lightning effect within the flask, and they found out that early molecules like RNA, certain amino acids, and maybe some preliminary lipids and proteins formed within the flask. So this is how they came to know that maybe the life form actually initiated as simple organic molecules that later went on to give life. So, but how do we actually know how exactly the life forms existed, like how exactly did the life forms come up, or how life was actually evolving from a single molecule to a cellular organism and then to multicellular organism that we see today. So we all have heard of the famous naturalist Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, even though was a naturalist, had no idea of traveling to Galapagos Island on his HMS Beagle. But an interesting friend of him took him on a voyage to Galapagos Island, where he studied on various organisms. Now the interesting part about Galapagos Island is it is situated almost in the equator of the earth, which makes it biodiversically very rich. Hence Darwin had an advantage in that place that he could observe a variety of organisms like Darwin turtles and finches and everything, and he found out that there is something which is interestingly connecting each organism. So, and that forms the basis of natural selection. So, what does natural selection say? According to Darwin, natural selection is an unseen force that is put upon by nature through its various climatic conditions, which will help the organism to adapt itself to the changing environment and then evolve from that, so that only the reproductively fit organism will survive and multiply, whereas the others will perish. Similarly, there was another guy called Alfred Wallace, who was in Malayan archipelago. Who had similar observations in regard to Charles Darwin, even though they both of them did separately, like their work was not linked in any ways. Later, Darwin comes to know about all this work and then he appreciates. But somehow, what Darwin had never focused about, how Mendel had, like way back in 1800s, how Mendel had talked about certain factors. Maybe Darwin didn't throw light, or maybe he forgot to do. So there are certain things about that also that we will discuss in the coming parts. How do we know that the evolution actually happened? So let's term them evidences, or the examples that we have to show that actually evolution happened. As we discussed, evolution is a phenomenon that has taken around millions of years to establish on any celestial body, including Earth. So in Earth, the evolution of life has been found, like the evidences has been found from something interesting called fossils. What are fossils? Fossils are nothing but the preserved ancient remnants of organisms. It might be, like we have heard of an interesting example is dinosaur. Right? Dinosaur is every child's or everybody's that typical interesting organism from childhood. So, but we don't see dinosaurs anymore because they are not there on Earth anymore. And now we have the evidences of dinosaur from the fossils that was formed in the sediments of soil many years ago. And how do we actually measure the age and everything of this fossil? It is through carbon dating. The most widely used technique to study fossils is carbon dating, and the study of fossils is called paleontology. And the evidences that we get from paleontology is paleontological evidences. So this is one example of, or one evidence that we have for evolution. Second evidence if we have for evolution, if we look into the living organisms right now, if we see a lot of common characters. Let's say, okay, there are two terms, homologous and analogous, right? So now if we look into any organism, there are certain characters that we see, like a very common character can be eating food, or say locomotion. Let's say locomotion. So if we take locomotion, we have 4 limbs, even a cat has 4 limbs. What is the difference? They use all the 4 limbs to travel, but we use only 2 limbs, and the other 4 limbs that we don't use. So the 4 limbs, like if we take the examples of 4 limbs in locomotion, we all know it has common parts like say humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and etc. So there are many parts, and they are similar in both cat as well as us. But what do we do differently? So with our 4 limbs, we use our 4 limbs for variety of action. Right now I am speaking to you and I am using my hands to show the gestures, and the cat uses it for running, it has its primary escape mechanism from its predator. So in this case, we see that the origin of both these organisms, my hands and a cat's limbs, are same. They are made up of the same things. They came from the same tissue. They originated from the same cells, but the functioning of it is different. Origin is same, but function is different, right? So such organs are called as homologous organs. Origin same, function different. And the opposite of this is nothing but analogous. So let's take an example of analogous. So if you take a butterfly, or let's take a bird with its wings. So butterfly's wings and the bird's wings has the same function, it's flight, but their origin is different. The bird's wings are again from the forelimbs that we are talking about, but from the butterfly point of view, it's merely an insect. So its abdomen is segmented, and due to that it has a forelimb. So now that is a case of analogous organs, wings of butterfly and a bird. Now how do we correlate this to evolution? So we know that from this, like from homologous evidences, let's say a cat had to run from its predator, and we had to use our hands for various purposes apart from running, because we don't need them for running anymore. So in this case, we have evolved differently. From the same origin, we have evolved our organs for different functions. So in that case, it is called divergent evolution, because it is from same organs, it has diverged. So let's say this homologous organs gave rise to divergent evolution. But at the same time, the analogous organs, like a wing of a butterfly and wing of a bird, it gave rise to a same function. It gave rise to, from different origin, they came to a same function. Hence, it's called convergent evolution. So from this we come to know that evidences can be fossilized, or it can be both homologous and analogous, which give rise to divergent as well as convergent evolutions respectively. Apart from that, an interesting example of the evidences came from London sometime back in 1920s, when the Industrial Revolution was at its peak. Industrial Revolution. So what happened during this time was, so a team of naturalists or a science enthusiast conducted a survey in early 1850s when this Industrial Revolution was not happening in London, and they found out the population of white moth was high when compared with dark melanized moth. Low, right? Because, okay, this was the case, and in 1920s they found that this has reversed, like the white moth has become lower in number and the melanized moth had now become higher in number. Now they wanted to relate this to something else that was happening, and the one common thing that occurred in between this time was the Industrial Revolution. So we know when Industrial Revolution happened, there was this mass flow of industries, a lot of industries got opened, a lot of people went into the job and everything, and hence the pollution was at its peak, and a lot of gas got emitted, a lot of toxins got emitted into the land. And let's see, there were trees, right? And what is the color of barks of tree? Let's say dark. And when moths are present on this dark bark, maybe it cannot be seen, right? But when there is no pollution, there is another organism that lives on tree called lichens. which are light colored. Hence, the tree was full of lichens. The tree was full of, say, lichens which are white in color, and in that many moths lived. Now, since the moth's color was also white and the lichens color was also white, they were not being seen by their predators, hence their population was high. Whereas the melanized moth living on this would look different as a black spot or a dark spot on lichen, and hence their predators would find them easily and catch hold of them. Now, when the Industrial Revolution happened, these lichens are known to be very sensitive to such pollutants and toxins, and hence their population diminished. As their population diminished, whatever was there on these lichens got exposed to their predators, and now the tree got its natural color of this dark pigment, and hence the darker melanized moth which was present was not being seen, and hence the light colored moths was predated easily than the light colored moths. So, from this we come to know that actually having a background with which you can camouflage will help you survive better than having a background that give you away. So, that is what happened with this, and this was completely influenced not by natural course, but by the human interference and anthropogenic interference called Industrial Revolution. So, now let us see what happened in other parts of the world. Another interesting evidence of evolution came from Australia, where, what is Australia famous for? Australia is famous for its kangaroos, right? Because they carry their babies in pouch. Now, what did they come to know in Australia? In Australia, there was a common ancestor A, let us call her or him A. This ancestor gave rise to many marsupials. Marsupials are nothing but, say, placenta having mammal like organisms, but they are originated from a common ancestor, and they have certain similar characters which are common to their ancestors. So, for example, one was Tasmanian wolf, one was sugar glider, right? Another would be mole, let's say a tiger cat, and say a kangaroo. And this was where? In Australia, in one particular geographical location. So, in one particular geographical location, when one ancestor gives rise to many other organisms or descendants, it is called adaptive radiation, because that particular ascendant, its progeny to adapt to different climatic factors that was present in one geographical area. That is why it is called adaptive radiation. Now, with this marsupials in Australia, a similar another adaptive radiation that was happening was placental mammals. If you look for evidences, or if you just refer your textbooks, you will know what are the other examples. So, like example, this Tasmanian wolf, instead of this a placental mammal analog was wolf. Instead of mole, there was a mole there also, placental mole was there, and in case of tiger cat, maybe there was a bobcat. Right. So, similarly, there were so many examples that was happening in placental mammals also. So, now we see the same geographical location, Australia, had two kind of evolution, two kind of adaptive radiation. So, one was marsupial adaptive radiation and the other was placental mammalian adaptive radiation. So, when more than one adaptive radiation occur in one geographical area, even that is called as convergent evolution. Now, can you think why it is called convergent evolution? Yeah, because the ancestor was different, but all these organisms got evolved to adapt to the same set of geographical conditions that was available. Both tiger cat and bobcat, even though came from two different origins, two different ancestors, they adapted themselves to survive in one particular ecological conditions or geographical conditions. So, that is why it is also another interesting example of convergent evolution, just like the analogous limbs, right. So, now let us go to the another interesting topic of how exactly biological evolution happened. So if we look into biological evolution, like we were discussing earlier, the first figure that comes into our head when we talk about evolution is Charles Darwin. And do you know why? Is it because he traveled in HMS Beagle? Or is it because he knows Galapagos Island well? No. It is because he actually was a very important person who coined a very interesting phenomenon and its term called natural selection. So according to him, what is natural selection? So there are few organisms, let's say you, me and somebody else. We are living on the earth right now. We know that the world is constantly evolving, the galaxy is expanding, the world is expanding, and we read a lot of newspaper reports where we say the temperature is rising, the ice caps are melting, and all these evidences say that the earth is no longer going to be the same, and it was never the same. The past is not fixed and the future is not fixed, it is always evolving. But there was an interesting group of people who actually thought, or there are still among us who really think that there was a supreme power which raised earth, and the earth was made as such and it will remain as such. And this was called supreme special creation, the theory of special creation, where exactly we coined the term God, or I don't know, any mystical feature for that. So they believe that the God or the special creator was the one who created earth as such, like how it is seen today. It was like this only, so it will remain like this in the future, and it was like this in the past, and this is not going to be fixed. But however, we know that the natural selection says otherwise, at least in the life forms, and we have physical evidences to show that Pluto is no more in the planets, so it is a dwarf planet right now. So the science is evolving, and hence all these things are prone to change. So now in natural selection what happens? So we are here right now, and all these climatic changes are happening. Say tomorrow, in another 100 years or say another 200 years, maybe the soil pH will go above, it will become alkaline, right? If it become alkaline, then we have to learn to survive on the alkaline conditions, and the plants will have to grow on alkaline soil and everything. So now that we have a lot of biotechnological tools and everything which are making us fit for everyday changes, there is also some natural process that has been happening for millennia which was not interfered by any human beings. So in that case also there is certain things that will cause a difference in the organism, and that will be inherited over generation in order to make them fit for the future earth. Now the question is, will we survive it or not? So the whole point of natural selection was that, so if there is a change and an organism has to survive it, it has to survive it. So the natural selection says that when environment expose an organism, say a microbe, to an n number of variable changes, that population of microbe which will adapt for its survival, it will adapt into certain variations which will be inherited, and hence it will survive, and that will be at its peak most reproductive fitness, and that will be selected by the nature. When Darwin coined the term fitness, he meant reproductive fitness. Because in order to give rise to organisms, one organism must reproduce either asexually or sexually. So in this case, what Darwin was trying to say, the reproducibly fit organism, or an organism with higher reproductive fitness, will survive all the odds that will be thrown at it by the nature, and then will be selected by the nature for the future. So now that the case of reproductive fitness and natural selection is there was another interesting French biologist or naturalist called Lamarck. And Lamarck had an interesting story about giraffes, right? So what did Lamarck say? So what did Lamarck say? Lamarck thought the present day giraffes, which has long necks, right? So the present day giraffe has long neck and it eats the leaves that are present in the tallest of the trees from the tallest of the branches. And there are some donkeys, right? Some donkeys are there, some goats, some donkeys, some goats which have smaller necks. So what Lamarck said was, once upon a time even these giraffes had small neck, they had small neck. But then, and the tree was here, the tree didn't change, the tree was here. So now it had to eat grass. I don't know why it couldn't eat grass from the ground, but anyways, it had to eat grass. So then what it was doing, it was trying to hop here, but then it was not possible. So it tried and it tried. So according to Lamarck, what he says is every time it tries, that there is an urge to reach to this grass. So that urge get reproducibly transferred, like inherited to next generation. So over generation, that urge given them a longer neck, and hence they were able to reach the tree in order to eat the foliage of the tree. But somehow we do not see that in action. I mean, we don't have, so there were shorter giraffes also which could eat from grass from ground, but we don't see them anymore. And there could have been intermediate giraffes also which maybe look like horse, but we don't see them anymore. Hence people actually was not following this theory and they gave up on this theory. But can you think of some other examples where this theory might be still prevalent? Can you think of some plants or some phenomenon in plant where this could be prevalent? Okay, that is for you to think. So now, when we talk about this natural selection and fitness and everything about Darwin was actually influenced by a few concepts that was already available in population, about the population studies. So in population studies, a lot of people had actually influenced Darwin in multiple ways. Like we were talking about Alfred Wallace and all. In his Origin of Species, that book, you will know who are the people who helped him. So population studies, another interesting guy who did population studies was Thomas Malthus. From his studies, what he comes to know, which is well-known facts, like one could be in a study of population, a population should be fixed, right? A population is fixed unless there is some seasonal fluctuation or seasonal changes. Somebody came, somebody changed, some tsunami came, a lot of people died. So these can be certain examples of where the population's it becomes dynamic. The second thing was that resources are limited. Right now in this room maybe I have very few resources. So like that, resources are limited. For a population living in one geographical area, the resources of that geographical area are limited. And what else? What could we think of? Could we think of any other population based this thing? Okay, let's see if an organism is reproducibly fit at its maximum reproductive fitness. Maximum reproductive fitness. Imagine if in a population everybody is attaining the maximum reproductive fitness at the same point. Then the population will be like this, exponential. Number of people, time, right? This is a case where everybody has maximum reproductive fitness. So these were the few assumptions that Darwin had in mind when he was coining and discussing about natural selection. Now we know, for example, in a gene pool. Okay, before that, what is a gene pool? So gene pool is a very simple term, like it says. Pool is nothing but what? A large body, right? Gene pool is a large body of genes. Simple. It's just a geographical location which has a population. The accumulation of all the genes in this population is a gene pool. Okay, the addition of all the sum total of all the genes in this population is called a gene pool of that population. So when they were talking about this gene pool and everything, they had this interesting idea in their head called, what is the mechanism of evolution actually? What are the various mechanistics that happens within a population that will urge that population to evolve? So for that to happen, what these people did was, like, there was an interesting guy called, there is a interesting equation which is like a plus b the whole square, a basic binomial algebraic expression which gives as to a square plus 2ab plus b square. This is a 7th standard equation. So now when we say biology is devoid of maths, let's put some math into biology. So what happens in this case? Let's keep this in one side of our mind. So in a population where people are there and the gene pool is stable, so according to Hardy-Weinberg, there is one Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, right? So according to this phenomenon, what happens is the frequency of all the alleles in a stable population, like I said, this population should be fixed. So in a fixed population is always equal to 1. That was his finding. So if you say, we know that there are 2 alleles of each character. So let's say an allele P and another allele P, right? So what they said was, a homozygous PP allele could be represented simply as A into A, which is called A square, or P into P, which is equal to P square, right? Another homozygous recessive allele small p could be written as B into B, which is B square, or small p into small p, which is small p square. Now, they were also able to represent a heterozygous allele PP as 2AB or 2 capital P small p. So now if we equate this equation, we get A square, which is written A square plus B square is equal to A square plus 2AB plus B square. Or if we are discussing it in terms of P, we get capital P square plus 2 capital B small b plus capital small b square is equal to capital B plus B the whole square. These are just same with different variables, the same equation with different variables. So what Hardy-Weinberg says is that this, whatever this is always equal to 1. Now when the gene pool gets, this is when the gene pool is standard, like it's stagnant, it is not moving anywhere. When this gene pool get disturbed, let's say there is some movement, some people get migrated, some organisms got migrated. Continental Drift was an example where many of the South America had a lot of organisms like bear and certain leopards and cats and everything. But when during Continental Drift, when this North America and South America got, right, they got changed, they got separated, and this is the equator. So certain organisms that was already, earlier they used to be like one, as Gondwana, as a part of Gondwana. So when they got separated, certain organisms that was in between, like going here and there, just got here itself. Some people just stayed here, some went there. So this is a typical example of where a constant gene pool gets disturbed. So in this case, actually the gene pool could be disturbed due to 5 major reasons, which I call them simply as 3G, M and N. This is a simple way of remembering. What are the 3 Gs? One is gene flow, right? The other one is genetic drift. Another one is this old genetic recombination, which you already know maybe. and N is our natural selection. And M is mutation. Now mutation is a new word that we are for the first time in this video at least. So what is gene flow? Gene flow is nothing but due to migration, people are moving, or one population, a part of population or an entire population is moving from one place to another place, and hence the gene pool gets disturbed, right? Let's say migration is a major reason for this. It can be natural or unnatural, like we would rather write planned or unplanned. This could be either ways, planned by organism or planned by nature, unplanned by organism or unplanned by nature, right? The another thing is drift. If this gene flow, whatever this gene flow is, if it is happening accidentally, let's say unplanned gene flow or chance, due to chance based gene flow, or gene flow that happens due to chance, it is called genetic drift. Like it is very unexpected, it was not supposed to happen but it happened, and hence there is a drift between the gene pools. This is called genetic drift. And gene recombination is during sexual reproduction, during gametogenesis, especially during the gametogenesis of sexual reproduction, due to which the characters get say very recombinedly distributed, or in a layman terms we can say a hybrid which could be better, which is mostly better than parents, or we can say different from parents. Of course, when a population is reproducing sexually, it gets recombined and the new alleles or the new traits or a new character or a new physical phenomenon emerges within the population. So that is due to the genetic drift. And natural selection is as described by Darwin himself, that nature selects a particular population for its reproductive fitness for a particular geographical point of time. Now what is mutation? So again, the mutation has a huge backstory behind. So a guy called Hugo de Vries, right? Hugo de Vries was working on a plant called Athira. Maybe the species was Lamarckian, I don't remember, maybe due to Lamarck, because on his name. So Athira, or it's commonly called evening primrose or primrose, whatever, evening primrose. So in this plant, he observed that there is sudden changes, like due to various physical and chemical or external factors, there are sudden changes that are inheritable and they are rising, like spontaneously. So spontaneous inheritable or sudden inheritable changes, he called them mutation. Mutation is nothing but sudden heritable changes, according to Hugo de Vries. A sudden heritable changes within a population he called mutation. Now we know that even Darwin was talking about variation. So for example, he was talking about this Darwin Finches. Darwin Finches, as a part of his Galapagos Island expedition, let's say he went on an HMS Beagle and now he is in Galapagos Island, okay. So in Galapagos what he sees is an interesting set of birds. So imagine this is that bird, okay. And what he sees is that these birds have different kind of necks, like some has very sharp necks, some have blunt necks, right, beaks, sorry, not necks, beaks. So now he sees it's all the same bird, its flight is same, its shape is same, its color is same, just the shape of its beak is different. So now he observed like what is their behavior, how are they behaving in the everyday course. So then they came to know that this beak, whosoever his beak is sharp, maybe it was eating some insect or some flesh, whereas a blunt beak was eating some fruits, seeds, some soft bodied items. So then from this he understands that it needs a sharp beak to tear the flesh or to prick an insect and catch hold of it, whereas this normal beak or a blunt beak it would use for scraping the fruit or scraping the seed and its endosperm and everything for its nutrients. So this was one interesting observation that Darwin made in Galapagos Island. So what is so interesting about it is, he says this variation among organisms is very directional. I mean, there is one reason, there is a direction for it, some, because maybe earlier they were eating only fruits. Now they, due to multiple reasons, due to human beings are going and they are taking away all the fruits and everything. Now meat is available, so slowly the birds has to eat meat. And this is just an example. So there is a direction for the changes that is happening. But however, for Hugo de Vries, there was no such direction. Suddenly the mutation would happen and that would give rise to a new trait and that would make up new species. Hence, species raised from this mutation, he called it saltation. This saltation is a 1 mark question. All the terms that comes in this lesson has 1 mark questions and experimental designs have 2 or 3 mark questions. So the saltation happens. So he called it saltation. Now, another interesting thing is, so when we are talking about all these things, right? If you take a microbial population and you are subjecting it to some sort of external, say there is a microbial population, this curve represents the microbial population, and there is some sort of number of individuals, okay, and this can be the change, the given change. So if they are giving some sort of urges, like change in climatic factors, if the microbial population is subject to a climatic factors, 3 things can happen. What are the 3 things? 1, whatever population is there, all the population can try and manage to live in this condition and become stabilized. So in that case what happens is, all the population will try to manage and the peak will rise. Their population peak will try to accommodate that change in the given point and then the peak will just rise instead of broadening. This is one case. So it is called a stabilizing peak, a stabilizing population. A stabilizing population. So in another case what can happen? So anyway the climatic changes, characters are changing. Like how Darwin spoke, some are fit, some are unfit. So unfit people keep, or unfit population keep, getting died, or their population keep diminishing, and the functional unit or a survival population, that will keep arising. So what happens is, this peak will be slightly shifted towards the side, not towards the center, because only one set of population is getting evolved and they are surviving better. So this is called shifting or a drifting population. Now third one, what can happen? Nobody survives. Anybody might eliminate. So in that case what happens? A peak like this will be formed. This is called a disruptive peak, where the peak is getting disrupted. So from in this, what did we study? There is a gene pool, and gene pool is generally stable and its frequency is almost equal to 1 all the time. But if there is certain changes in the gene pool due to gene flow, genetic drift, or this 3GMN, then that creates a disturbance and this frequency changes from 1. And when this happens, there is 3 kind of phenomena we can see in that population. Either for the given change or given trigger, the population might stabilize, they get disrupted, or they will get naturally selected and shift to one side. Now, importantly, now this is happening. How can we correlate this to day-to-day life? Like, what is that recent evidences that we have in evolution? So these are the certain things that we do on population. But earlier we were discussing on dinosaur and everything. So there, since the Earth's condition is changing, like its history was a different story, its present is another different story, its future going to be new story. So how are we going to correlate this? Like, how do we see it? How do we look it from the point of evolution? So that we will discuss now. A brief history of evolution. So let's consider 2 important class of organisms, group of organisms, animals and plant. Animals and plants. Now, Let's take two habitat, immediate habitat. One is water. Let's imagine this is water, and this is land and water. Now, in case of animals, we know that in both the cases, the first cellular forms are believed to be evolved in water, right. So, in animals, if we take fish, which is a primitive form of animal, lives in water, fish or sponges or echinoderms. So, there are so many water living organisms. Then amphibians like frog, which needs both water and land to survive. And then there are reptiles which are absolutely land dwelling. And from reptiles, there was two sections. One was aves or the birds, and the another was mammals, which includes human beings. This was the side of animals. Now, if we take plant side, there was algae. There was algae which could be of different colors and things, algae or seaweeds. So, from algae, it is believed that algae crawled up. The evolved form of algae you can actually find in muddy soil also. So, basically that shows how they were evolving towards land biomass also, land mass also. So, in that case, bryophytes. Later algae also come here. So, bryophytes. Which are called amphibians of plant kingdom. Then we have pteridophytes, which are called reptiles of plant kingdom, and then there is seeded plants, both closed and open seeded, called gymno and angiosperms, right. So, we know that the rough evolution was like that. Everything was in water first, and then fishes and algae evolved to form amphibians on land, which were both in water and land. So was bryophytes, and then they developed into or evolved into reptiles and pteridophytes respectively. And when reptiles also evolved into birds which could fly and mammals, pteridophytes evolved into both gymno and angiosperms. Now, in between also there were so many, this is just a rough example, right. So, then there is so many interesting things that are happening in between this web in different point of time scale. So, one could be like say if we take 320 million years ago, the fish we are talking about, before they became amphibians, there were some special fishes which had very stout fins. They could just crawl up from water to land and go back to water. This shows like how interesting they were to explore what land is, and maybe due to certain limitations they had to go back to water. So, similarly in reptiles also, if you see reptiles, we know that reptiles are land animals, but we see crocodile in water. Why? Again, so the reptiles, even then they were evolved, they wanted to try what, or they wanted to explore the water. So, in that case there was one ichthyosaurs which went into water and tried to live there, like it might be the ancestor of crocodile. So, then this is somewhere around say 200 Maya. And another, in reptiles we also think of dinosaurs. So, the most legendary reptile was some Tyrannosaurus rex. It is believed this Tyrannosaurus rex was the most scariest beast that ever walked on earth, because it had this large teeth and everything. So, its bones were found in this thing. So, hence Tyrannosaurus rex was there, but we have no idea why they got extinct. So, it might be climatic change, or it might be they also believe there might be some asteroid hit or something. So, when this happened, this earth was full of pteridophytes. Now, we see very small pteridophytes which are often used as ferns and everything in people's pots in their houses, but pteridophytes which were giant like trees, they were called tree ferns. Now, we have very few species like Angiopteris which are still available, but during that time it was all tree ferns. And it is also believed that a large amount of reptiles were also feeding on these ferns. They had this vegetarian habit, and later they became meat eating or carnivorous, and then the mammals evolved. So in mammals, another interesting example is of course us human beings. So what is the story of us like? How did we come? What special thing do we, since we consider ourselves very mighty over other organisms, what is that special thing? Why are we considered very evolved? Even in a part of biodiversity we stand, or we would like to place ourselves in the middle of biodiversity, not as a part of it, as a ruler of everything. Why? So around say, so we know that 500 million years ago the first life form, cellular form, organic molecule 2000 million years ago, and we discussed on all this 200, 300. So around 3 to 4 million years ago, which is very recent in the time scale, in the geographical time scale. So in around this place, there were guys called Dryopithecus, and Ramapithecus. We might find some interesting character here, Ramapithecus, because the name comes from our mythology. So this Dryopithecus is also kind of our mythology. You just have to imagine Hanuman, and let's imagine Ram. This is just for an example. So in this case, what happens? They lived in the same point time scale. This Dryopithecus was more monkey-like or ape-like, but the early man, Ramapithecus, was more man-like. Right? So this was ape-like and this was man-like. And in this case, so what was common between them? Both of them were hairy. If you compare their anatomical and morphological structures, you might be able to link them to gorillas and chimpanzees of today. And these they found in certain African islands, like African continent. Now, around 1.5 million years ago, certain hominids means human-like, called Australopithecines, were seen. Now, what is very interesting about them is that they stood erect like us on our two legs, and they were nearly 4 feet, maybe shorter than us, or like of course today we have better heights also. I mean, we have varied height. Back then they were very short people. And then another thing was and they could hunt and go around. They used stones as their hunting materials, and they ate fruits, like they had again vegetarian food habit, and they hunt with stones. This would be the probable stone age that we discuss in our history classes. And they were called as, because they were early man who habitated the earth, and they had certain primitive these things. And later, around some time after, there were again a small modification in their characters. They became meat eating, and they stood erect just like that. So hence they were called Homo erectus. And the interesting part is also their brain capacity is also high, increasing. Now the brain capacity in these terms are measured by cranial capacity, which could be called CC. So in this case, in the first case, it was somewhere around say 650 cc or something, and in this case they had almost came around 700 to 800 cc. I mean, their brain is massive, and now the networking is more, and their thinking ability is increasing. Now Neanderthals in Asia had almost 1400 cc's. Like if you see, they have been evolving their cranial capacities also. And later, around 75,000 to 10,000, this was around 75,000 to 10,000 years ago. And later, around 10,000 years ago, the agriculture came, all the human beings started settling, and then they started forming civilization, and hence that today is called Homo sapiens arrived. But today we are even Homo sapiens sapiens, which are like one step ahead than Homo sapiens, but then this is a brief history of humankind. So if we look at evolution, we can never understand evolution in one go because we don't see it in action. But then there is a lot of historical evidences, paleontological evidences, anatomical and morphological evidences which will support the theory of evolution. One interesting example is if you compare all the embryos from fish to human beings, they are all anatomically, morphologically similar at the early phase. Later they differentiate into different fingers and all these organs, but initially at the inceptive time they are all similar. So this is one interesting example of how evolution can be, and this is one interesting place where you can ask a lot of questions. For example, one thing that you can explore more would be to see, when we said that the first cellular organisms occurred around 2000 years ago or 500 million years ago, were they prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Because then we have discussed all about eukaryotic, we have not discussed about bacteria. So in that case you can explore that. And another interesting thing that you could do is, if they were prokaryotic, how did eukaryotes come? How did the organelles form? So these things you could actually explore further. From exam point of view, this lesson contains a lot of 1 mark and 2 marks question, and you would have to, few important questions have come from Urey and Miller experiments, Darwin's observations and the industrial mechanism, and 1 marks question from all the definitions that we have discussed about, and a larger question might come from the various examples of adaptive radiations and convergent and divergent evolution. So for any questions, please put your questions in the comment box below and we will be happy to help you. Thank you for this opportunity.